Thank you, Simon. Welcome everyone to this morning's webinar. So my name's James, and over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through the key announcements from the SharePoint 2019 conference. Clearly, there was a lot of announcements in the conference, so I've actually picked what I believe are the most important and significant ones. I have, however, at the end of the slide deck, added a resources slide, and on that I've put a load of links. And those links will lead you to further information about what I'm covering, plus further information about many of the other things that were talked about at the event. And just to emphasize what Simon said, I'm really happy for questions as we go through. So if you've got a question, a comment, or an observation about anything that I'm covering, please do post it. It's really helpful to me to make sure that I'm making some sort of sense to you guys. So I'm going to start with SharePoint home sites, and this was probably the biggest announcement that Microsoft made. There was a lot of noise about it, and in my conversations with clients in the last 2 weeks, there's clearly quite a lot of confusion about what these are, how they fit into your SharePoint site architecture, and how they might change things in terms of what you think about in respect of intranets. So I'm going to talk through some of the key things here. Now, I should point out that this capability is not currently available. So I'm going to show you some screenshots, but I'm going to also show you some of the functionality that is available, the bits and pieces that are currently available. So what I've done with this slide is kind of highlight some of the key features that are appropriate for SharePoint home sites. Now, the key thing to think about is that these will effectively become the single landing page for users within your SharePoint environment. So historically, that's been considered your SharePoint root site. And indeed, anyone who creates a new tenancy once SharePoint home sites has been rolled out will find that they get a SharePoint home site as their default SharePoint root site. Obviously, for most of us who already have tenancies, that's not an option. However, as you'll see later on, Microsoft are introducing a capability to allow you to swap your current SharePoint root site with another site within your tenancy. So I'll cover that a bit shortly. So let me just talk about what are these SharePoint home sites. So firstly, they are simply a type of communication site. So Microsoft will be adding a new template option into the communication sites called organization. And when you create a home site, basically it will use the new template called the organization template. You've probably seen, and this feature is currently available, that you can put a link up in the top left corner to any SharePoint site, and that link would typically be to your SharePoint home site. A new feature they're introducing, and you might start seeing this in your tenancy, is the ability to conduct a tenancy-wide search. So currently, when you're looking at a SharePoint site, you might have noticed that the search bar has moved up into the application bar at the top. And for a home site, that search box will by default search content across the whole of your SharePoint environment. The site will make use of some of the new content management features. So over on the right-hand side, something that I'm quite excited about is the ability to include a new vertical column into your pages. Now, this has a couple of benefits. Firstly, it allows you to extend the default width of SharePoint pages as far as I understand. So currently SharePoint pages have a finite width, and therefore they don't extend any further when you're on a widescreen monitor. But this new right-hand column or left-hand column, whichever side you want to put it on, will allow you to increase the width of a page. Now, in this screenshot I've got here, there is a couple of web parts in the right-hand column: my frequent sites, my news, my recent documents. Those are all currently available today. But the idea would be within a home site that your personalized content would appear in the right-hand column. And then finally, the SharePoint mobile app is going to be updated. So there will be an icon on it, it'll be a little home icon, and that will effectively take you to your SharePoint home site. So it'll act in a similar way to the link at the top of the screen over here. Now, if I just move on, one feature that I can show you today is this concept of news being designated as official or authoritative news. So when you create a home site, it will automatically be designated as an official news source. Now, quite simply, what this means is that when you roll up news from multiple SharePoint sites into a single place, any news that comes from a site that's designated as official or authoritative will have what they call a visual cue, which in this case is a bold and highlighted section which explains the site it comes from. So I'm just going to show you this in my environment. So this site I'm looking at is actually just a normal SharePoint communication site. So this is all functionality that's available today. The link to the site is controlled by the top over here, and this is what I mentioned, that you'll be able to specify this to point to your SharePoint home site. Now, on this page, if I scroll down, a couple of things we can see is we already have the web parts that show personalized content. So here's the list of my sites. So these are sites that you are actively involved in, and obviously that's personalized to you as an individual. This is the My News. So this is content being pulled from around your SharePoint environment that's targeted for you. And these are documents that you've recently accessed. Now, if I scroll down a little bit further, one of the things that I've got here is one of the web parts. It's called the Hub News web part. This is currently available, and this allows me to pull content from around the SharePoint environment. But you'll notice here that any content that comes from the News at Contoso site has a highlighted banner. So it stands out from this site, Give at Contoso, Benefits at Contoso, any of the other sites, okay? So you can see that, how it's been highlighted. And that also is reflected if I go to the SharePoint Start page. So if I go into this page, and again, this is currently available today, and I look at news and I say, show me all the news in my SharePoint environment, then you'll see here that news that comes from the News at Contoso site has a slightly different banner associated with it. So that's what we refer to as authoritative or official news. I've put a link into the slide. So if you're interested, there's a PowerShell command that you run that designates a given SharePoint site as being authoritative. Okay, so a slight change of terminology here. Currently in your SharePoint environment, when you click the SharePoint link, it would always take you to what was previously called SharePoint Home. Now, because Microsoft are introducing the concept of SharePoint Home Sites, they've renamed this page to be the SharePoint Start page. Now, it's going to look slightly different, but essentially it will act in the same way. So it will bring together the sites that you frequently access, sites that you follow, sites that you've recently visited, and news from around the organization. But a couple of changes that will happen. Firstly, it will support the tenancy-wide search. So by default, when you're on your SharePoint Start page, in the same way as if you're on your SharePoint Home site, when you do a search, it will extend to the whole of the SharePoint environment by default. The second thing is it will carry the branding from your SharePoint Home site. So currently it doesn't do this. Currently it just inherits the default SharePoint branding. But in the new world, what will happen is it'll inherit the same branding as the home site. So you can see here, there's a link on the navigation for my SharePoint Home. Now, just to quickly show you that, so if I go into my SharePoint Home in this tenancy, currently it's not inheriting the branding, but one of the things it is doing is giving me the tenancy-wide search. So if I click into the search box up here, it will automatically make suggestions to me of content that I've frequently accessed. So you can see here, these are the sites I've frequently accessed. These are documents I've frequently accessed. This is news articles. And obviously I can go ahead and start doing a search. If I was looking for content relating to marketing, then this content is coming from my entire SharePoint environment, okay? Okay, so I thought it would be kind of useful just to talk through what this means and answer some common questions that I've been asked on this. So let me just reiterate, we have a SharePoint home site here, and in a brand new tenancy, your SharePoint home site will automatically be created. It will be your root site. So that's your kind of topmost SharePoint site in your hierarchy. If you have an existing tenancy, as I said, you will be able to convert your existing root site to be a home site. It uses a SharePoint communication site, but just uses a special template called the organizational template. And by default, it is set as an authoritative news source, and it implements the tenancy-wide search, okay? Now, sitting adjacent to that, you have what is now going to be called the SharePoint Start page. And this is what you currently see as your SharePoint homepage. So it'll do broadly the same things. The only difference is it will inherit the branding from the home site, and excuse me, it will support the tenancy-wide search. Now, common questions I get here. So where does that leave hub sites? Well, hub sites are still hub sites. So in this scenario, I've created a hub site called Work at Contoso. And what that does is brings together all of the individual communication and team sites that relate to working for an organization. So in this case, I've created a site called Work at Contoso. It's a communication site. It's designated as a hub site because I want it to bring together the content from careers, pages, pay and benefits, I should say, and learning. And obviously one of the things a hub site does is it gives us some consistent navigation, consistent branding, and it allows the search to be scoped to all of the sites within the all of the associated hub sites, okay? And over here, I've got a couple of other sites. So these are just SharePoint sites that sit on their own. So I've got a communication site, exec reporting, and I've just got a project site sitting here. Now, both of these by default, the search will be scoped just to the site itself. And you'll probably see this as of today in your tenancies, that when you go to a SharePoint site, so if I go to sales and marketing, for instance, here, and I click search, the search is going to be scoped to the site that I'm currently looking at. So if I go into sales and marketing here, go to the home page, you see it says search this site. So when I start doing a search, the search will be scoped to this site. If I click back up to the hub that it's associated with, which is Work at Contoso, then you'll notice that at the top, the search will change to all of the sites that are associated with this hub. So these are changes that are probably already in your tenancy, and it's worth just taking a note of how the different search contexts work depending on what you're currently looking at. Okay, so that's hub sites. Oh, one other thing, so I've been asked this a few times. Can a SharePoint home site be a hub site? Yes, it can. It is essentially no different than any other communication site. So you can designate it as a hub site if you want to. Okay, a couple of other features to do with creating SharePoint pages. And there's absolutely loads of these been announced, but I'm going to pick the ones that I think are quite important. So a couple to do with branding. We have this concept called a shy header. And what that means is that when a user scrolls down the page, the header bar gracefully reduces in size. So currently in a SharePoint site, if you're on a small screen, this can be a bit annoying that when I scroll down, you can see here the header bar is taking up quite a lot of screen real estate. And what actually happens with a shy header is it slowly reduces in size, or reduces in size to different states, so I can still see it, but it doesn't occupy as much screen real estate. Footer down at the bottom. So they introduced footers a while ago, so we can now add footers. And if you haven't noticed, they've just introduced the edit button down here, so I can add footer items directly from within the footer. However, what you currently can't do is create a taller footer. So sometimes I want to create a footer that has a bit more content on it, like the example I've got in this page. And that's going to be some options that they include pretty soon. Custom fonts, if you as an organization have some specific fonts that you need to use for your corporate comms, then at the moment you haven't really got a lot of choice with SharePoint communication sites. The font is the font that you get, but they are going to start supporting custom fonts. Now, I'm not expecting this to be every font in the world, but I'm expecting them to have an additional option. So you might find that your desired Comic Sans is not supported, but they are going to give you some ones that will be supported. And the one that's particularly useful is this concept of organizational assets. So currently, when people are managing content within a site, they can pick images to use from pretty much anywhere. But what a lot of organizations want to do is create a central repository of approved organizational branding assets that can be used. And so, apologies, the screenshot's not very good here, but when you add an image onto a page, one of the options you'll get now is to select it from your organization's library of approved images. And that'll obviously work across multiple sites within your environment. In respect of some web parts, the one that I'm particularly excited about, and this is imminent, so it should be in target release tenancies any day now, is called audience targeting. So it allows me to take a news article and it allows me to specify which group, i.e. Office 365 group or security group, that this is targeted to. And then, for instance, on my home page, I can have a web part that says, okay, show me all the training documents in my region, or show me all the news articles that relate to the operating company that I work for. So it allows you to create a single page, but personalize the content so that people see what's relevant to them. I mentioned before about the new vertical page section. So you saw an example on the home page of the new SharePoint home site, but this vertical page section will be available across any page, any communication site. So that's going to be useful for creating much wider pages. And if you're interested in having a process to have news articles automatically publish on a given time frame, so say you've got a news announcement that you want to go out next Monday morning at 9 o'clock and you don't want to be there to press the button, then they're including a feature that allows you to schedule the publication of news articles. And for any of you needing to support multilingual scenarios, this is going to get significantly simple with the ability to create multilingual pages within the context of the same site. Okay, so that's kind of most of the main ones I wanted to talk about in respect of SharePoint home sites and pages. I'm just going to talk about some of the announcements regarding business applications. So this is where you want to use SharePoint as part of a business application, be it a business process, be it a document management system, those type of scenarios. So a couple of the ones that are coming as of today, you can use something called document sets in your environment. So this allows you to group documents together and apply governance to a group of documents in a way that you simply can't do with a folder. So it allows you to version control a group of documents as opposed to just store them all in a folder. So you'll have this in your tenancies. Check that one out if that type of document management capability is of interest to you. Bulk approvals is going to be super useful because it's very easy in SharePoint now to set up approval processes, but it's very frustrating to have to go and approve 50 documents one at a time. So you can see in the screenshot here, there's an example where the users selected 3 items. These items are all awaiting approval, and the user can simply just say, I'm going to approve these on batch. So that's going to make that significantly simpler. Now there's quite a lot of enhancements coming to lists and libraries, so I'm just going to flick over to my demo environment and I'm going to go to my sales and marketing site. So something that's available today is the ability obviously to create a list or library, and within the list or library add some formatting to the columns so you can make it easy for users to understand what the data is telling them. So in this case, I've selected the column here called color, and what I've done, these are all products, is I've said, well, the color of the product, I'll actually color the column in the color of the product, okay? And I could say take product type, and I can go to column settings, format this column, and it says, okay, how would you like to format this? So it will give me all of the options and say, well, okay, if it's an action camera, do you want to color it in yellow? If it's a audio, what do you want to color it at? Now, this is kind of useful, but it doesn't allow me to do any sort of logic at the moment in respect of, well, if the number's over this amount or if the number's under this amount, then provide a bit more context. So one of the things they're introducing is a little more complex logic of how I can apply formatting to the columns. So that's going to be useful. The other thing is, if I've created a library such as this, and I've created the columns, it's actually quite difficult to duplicate it, particularly for an end user. So they're introducing this concept where I can create a list from another list. So what I mean by that is if I go home and then I select add list, new list. So this will give me the option of, instead of just using the out of the box ones, it'll allow me to select other lists that already exist within the site. So I can kind of create templates and then reuse them. So that's going to be useful. A big one for us, we come across this all the time, is the ability to provide external users access into Power Apps. So currently, as of today, if you create a Power App, you can't allow an external guest user or anonymous external user to access it. That's going to change, and that's a really big thing, because a lot of times people want to build Power App solutions where the actual person interacting with it is a member of the public or is just an external person. And if you're building sort of complex document management scenarios where you need to capture metadata for documents that's a little more complicated than just a couple of columns, then the ability to create a Power Apps form to capture the columns you want is coming for SharePoint document libraries. And then finally, if any of you are using Flow to automate things, a couple of kind of really important missing features are definitely coming. So within Flow, you'll be able to create folders, you'll be able to grant access to individual files or folders, and also check in or check out files, something that's a little bit convoluted to do as of today, but that'll make it super easy. Okay, so I'm going to move on to some OneDrive announcements, and kind of the thing that I want to do with this slide is just really talk around some of the changes that are imminently coming. Now, you might notice if you look at OneDrive in your browser that they've introduced the concept of these golden folders, which kind of give you a bit more visual clue as to what the folder is, what's in it, and whether you've shared it. So you should already have that today. But things that are rolling out fairly imminently is the ability to tag a file and bookmark it and save it for later. So this will work wherever you are, from OneDrive libraries to SharePoint libraries. So you can kind of just tag an individual file, and then in OneDrive, it'll have this bookmark says save for later. So you can then go back to any of those files that you've tagged. When you go into OneDrive, it's going to suggest recommended files. So this is basically files that either you've recently interacted with or colleagues that you regularly work with have interacted with, providing you have access to the file, or files that maybe you've authored that your colleagues have also edited. So this is kind of a quick way of getting back to files if you're not quite sure where they were stored, or a notification if colleagues have been working on files that you're involved with. One that I'm kind of keen on is the ability to support what we call differential sync. So differential sync will allow you to reduce the bandwidth required to offline sync OneDrive and SharePoint content onto your local device. So Microsoft kind of say that currently this is supported with Microsoft Office files, but my experience is that's not yet been rolled out. But simply to give you an idea, say I've got a 32 megabyte PowerPoint presentation that I'm working with locally. When I update it, it has to sync 32 megabytes back up to OneDrive in the cloud, which is fine if you've got some great connectivity. But if I'm working on a train and I'm using a hotspot from my phone, that can be quite consuming. So what differential sync will do is obviously only synchronize the parts of the file that have changed. Now, the important point here is Microsoft is supporting differential sync for many other file types other than Microsoft Office files. So it will be for images and so forth. And in the link at the end of the deck, there is a place, I think, where they've listed all the file types they're going to support. The OneDrive search, that will already be in your tenancy. So this is the change that Microsoft are doing to search everywhere. So when you're in OneDrive, the search bar is contextual to OneDrive. So it'll search your OneDrive. And one that I think is going to be really useful is when you hover over a file, it gives what they call intelligent hover cards. So currently when you hover over a file, it will tell you the number of people that have viewed it, and it will give you some information about the file. But this is going to change, and particularly for Office documents. So in this example, it will give you this view called Inside Look. And what Inside Look will do is tell you roughly how long it will take you to read the file. Now, that obviously doesn't take into account how fast you read. That's just roughly it working out how long it's going to take someone to read the file. And it gives you at a glance some of the content from the file. Now, this isn't necessarily content that just comes from the title page. It tries to pull out what it thinks is relevant for the file. So that's going to be useful to, if you're looking through a set of files, to work out, do I want to open this file that tells me it's going to take me an hour to read? What is the file about? And the other thing is this activity highlights. So you can see here, it's saying this is a list of things that have recently happened to the file. So this is kind of an audit of telling you not only who's viewed the file, but how it's been edited, and also some suggestions here of, well, have you thought about sharing this file with these people because you are frequently working with them? Now, one last one over here actually is, and this is available today, I believe, is the ability to roll out OneDrive and specify SharePoint libraries that you want users to have automatically synchronized with their local device. So currently when you roll out OneDrive, the OneDrive application on Windows 10 will by default synchronize the user's own OneDrive, but it won't by default synchronize SharePoint document libraries or obviously Microsoft Teams document libraries. So you can now specify default ones that you want targeted users to automatically have synchronized onto their local device. So if you're trying to sort of make it easy for those scenarios where users need to work offline and you know either the Microsoft Teams or the SharePoint sites they need to have available when they're working offline, then you can automate that and make it very much easier for those users to get up and running and start using those files offline. One particular feature that I just want to call out, because I do this quite often, and this is going to make what I do quite often substantially easier. So this is a scenario where I want a group of external people or internal people to upload files into a single location. Now, currently, when you do this, one of the problems is that if everyone uploads to the same location, be it a file or be it, sorry, a folder or document library, then all of the participants can see all of the files in that location. So this new feature rolling out called Request Files allows you to select a given folder. And when you select a folder, it'll say, okay, who do you want to notify that they need to provide you some files? And you can obviously type in the email addresses of the people. This can be internal or external people. They will all be sent a notification, and that notification will contain a link to the folder, and they can click on it and upload the files. And the key thing for me is that recipients will only see the files that they upload. They won't see any of the other participants. So this is great for, say, HR scenario where you need employees to submit, you know, maybe their performance review that they've filled in, or it could be a tendering scenario where you want suppliers to upload bids into the same folder. And obviously the requester gets notified when files are added in there. Okay, so good old SharePoint admin. So over the last few years, Microsoft have slowly moved from the legacy SharePoint administration center to the new shiny administration center. But it's taken a while, and we have been in a situation where, as a SharePoint admin, it's necessary to use both admin centers, which can be very frustrating. Now, I would love to tell you that that's no longer the case, but it is making it substantially easier. So what they've done is they've said any classic features that what I mean by that, they've no intention of moving those to the new admin center. They have provided a nice set of links to those in the modern admin center. So if I go into my administration center, I'll show you what I mean. So this is the new admin center, and I'm sure if you've used SharePoint, you would have seen this. And you'll notice now a new option called Classic Features. And if I click into Classic Features, it says, here is a link to all of the administration tools that you need that we haven't yet moved into the admin center. So if I'm managing the term store, for instance, I click Open, and lo and behold, it's just a link back to the old admin center. So it's a little step forward, but you know, we're still into the old admin center and the old user interface, but it makes things slightly easier. The other thing they've added into here is the ability to apply bulk changes to sites. So for instance, I can select a set of sites here, and one of the options I get is bulk edit. So for instance, if I wanted to enable all of these sites to support sharing, and then I can say, yeah, allow sharing, don't allow sharing, only allow existing guests. Or as you saw in the example there, I want to bulk associate these sites to a hub site. And they're going to continue to extend this. So this will allow me to delete sites and do other things that simply are quite painful currently to do on a site-by-site basis. Another thing that they've introduced is the ability to change the URL of a site. So let's say in my environment, someone's created a site called brand, and that they've incorrectly used the URL, and I want to use it for something else, or for instance, they've misspelt the URL. So as of today, or as of last month, you have no choice apart from to create a new site and move all the content. What you can now do, and this isn't in this tenancy, but you might have it available, it's rolling out at the moment, is you can click edit next to URL and you can edit the URL. Now what's interesting here is if you change the URL, it will ensure that any existing links to the previous URL are redirected. So you don't kind of suddenly break links that go to your new site. It will respect the old URL and allow you to use the new one. Now I'm suspecting that that means that you can't then recreate a new site with your old URL without causing some problems. But to be able to rename a site is super important. And the other thing I briefly mentioned before is the ability to swap your root site. So this is the site that would exist at yourdomainname.sharepoint.com. It is that site. Now, if you've had a tenancy for a few years, that is likely to be an old classic site. If you've created a tenancy in the last few months, it's likely to be a communication site. But when they launch home sites, you might think it would be great if my root site is a home site. So there is some PowerShell available that will allow you to take an existing site you've built. So in my case, it could be /sites/James's home site, and tell it to make that site my root site, and it will replace it. Okay, so one thing we've seen a lot of sort of progress in recent years is around the bringing together of the Microsoft information protection, so the sort of encryption and rights management, and what you can do in SharePoint. And so we're making good strides forward, but this is quite slow. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of features that are really useful, but unfortunately, if you want access to them, they are only going to be available this year in private preview. But if these type of scenarios are important for you, I would absolutely suggest that you sign up for a private preview and get them enabled and start having a look at them. But let me just quickly explain what they are. So the first thing is, whenever you create a SharePoint site, as I'm sure some of you know, you can specify the sensitivity classification. So in my scenario here, I have created 5 sensitivity classifications that give the user an indication of the nature of the content that's being stored in the site. Now, as of today, these sensitivity classifications do absolutely nothing apart from give the user a visual reference, okay? But what they will do is allow you to specify governance settings to the site. So for instance, if I mark something as confidential, in another site, I've said if it's marked at confidential, automatically set it to prevent a user from downloading, printing, or syncing content from the site if they access the site from a non-managed device. So I'm accessing this site from a non-managed device. I can view all the documents in the browser, and I can open a document in, say, Word, but it will not allow me when I open the document to download it, and it will not allow me to open it in Word to desktop, which will obviously, because that means that a copy would be stored on my local device. So one of the things that I can do is apply this type of policy if the user says all the content in this site can be accessed, but if it's a non-managed device, I'm going to restrict what they can do. Now, what Microsoft are also doing is saying, okay, if you mark this site as confidential, we are going to ensure any content added into the site is automatically encrypted. So some of you may have come across this concept that I can take a set of classification labels in Word, and I can allow a user to say, okay, this content is highly confidential. So if I click highly confidential and I click save, this document now can only be viewed by a Silversands employee. It doesn't matter whether I send it via Gmail, it doesn't matter whether I put it in OneDrive and put a link on Twitter, it doesn't matter whether I put it in Dropbox. This document is now secure. And that's great. You know, it means that wherever that document goes, the security goes with it. The problem is that currently when you put these documents into SharePoint, SharePoint kind of says, okay, that document's protected, and it's not sure what to do with it. So if I upload a protected document into SharePoint, as I've done here, the document's here. If I open it, it will say, sorry, you can't open this document in the browser because SharePoint itself doesn't have rights to open the document. Okay, now this is a problem. It's a problem for three reasons. One, SharePoint can't index the document. And if SharePoint can't index the document, you can't find it based on the content. Secondly, you can't apply data loss prevention policies to the document because SharePoint can't see it. And third, you can't support co-authoring with the document. So these changes that are coming seem minor, but they're super important. They will change it so when you put protected documents into SharePoint, you can co-author them. You can open them in Office Online. And most importantly, you can apply data loss protection policies to them. Okay. Last thing I want to cover is kind of a useful thing that if you are concerned about inviting guests into your SharePoint environment, they are bringing in a new capability that will be in preview very shortly that basically says if you invite an external user to your environment, they can only exist there for 30 days and the site owner has to extend their access. And if the site owner doesn't extend the access via that guest will automatically be revoked. So this is good in scenarios where you want to give site owners the ability to invite guests, but you also want a kind of cleanup process that says, okay, as a site owner, you need to take responsibility for those people who you're giving external access to. I'll give you 30 days, 90 days, 180 days. After such time, you need to confirm that you want to extend the access, otherwise we're automatically just going to revoke it. So kind of a useful feature just for governing external users. So despite the fact the slide says highly confidential, that's not, that's just because I applied a protection policy to it. At the end of the slide, you will see all of these links. There's a ton of information on these. So pretty much everything I've spoken to is talked about in a little more detail than that. But I'm hoping that's been useful to you. If you've got any questions, we're going to be around for the next 15 minutes or so, so please feel free to type, ask any questions. But if you're not sticking around, thank you very much, everyone, and I'll hand you back to Simon.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff there, James. So well done for getting through that in such a short space of time. I'm not seeing any questions, but if you have any questions after the event, please respond to me. You'll get my email address in the follow-up email with the link to the recording. But thank you, everyone. So we'll just wait for a few more minutes. So just hang fire if you want to ask a question. But otherwise, thanks for attending, and we hope to be in touch soon.